mum, she kind of thought maybe this is what's going on. And then from then on, into the GP. And then you see, I suppose, what it creates straight away is emotion. Because the first thing, one of the lasting memories I have of it is obviously my mum getting quite upset at what had happened, the diagnosis. And as an 8-year-old, as I was, I didn't really understand what was going on. So, you ask some really pertinent questions straight away, like, right, my mum's quite upset here. Am I going to die? Because that's, as an 8-year-old, you haven't got much more than, is it life and death? You're not really into the depths of conditions, what they mean, etc. You just know health and good, bad. And I think that was where I went straight away. And then obviously my other most pertinent question was, can I still play football? And when I got you're going to be okay, we'll manage this and you will be able to play football, I think that helped me start focusing on what was going to happen. And I spent 4 or 5 days in hospital. Obviously none of it was particularly nice. It's something you remember, but by the end of the week, I think it sums up my kind of approach to it, is that by Friday, I was diagnosed on the Monday, and by Friday I'd already played in my first football match after diagnosis. So played a few. I didn't play a lot. We're not talking a big game, but I played 15 minutes. And that really, I think, sums up my kind of approach to how I've tried to tackle living with a condition.
I mean, you describe what I think a lot of people, we often don't appreciate, that young people don't have what we call abstract thought, which is when you realise that there's more to the world than yourself and your mum and your dad and your family. And so you made 2 points, didn't you? One is that, am I going to live or die? Which is quite, and the second one is, can I do the things that I normally do? And it sounds like at the time, the gravity of diabetes and the burden of it didn't quite grasp you. When did you sort of first become really emotionally aware that diabetes is here to stay with me for the rest of my life?
I think it takes a few months. I think within that first year, though, it starts to hit home. Probably by about, I think the age of 9, age of 10, I was asking questions about why me. I remember once getting quite upset with, so obviously something had gone wrong with my diabetes. And I remember once sort of breaking down and, screaming, and why me? Why is this me? Why has it happened to me? Why? And that was probably a year or 2 in, because all of a sudden it starts to dawn on you that this thing isn't going away. And, you start to I got a bit older, start to get a bit more of an understanding of what's going on. I started mixing with older kids. I was in the final, when I was diagnosed, I was in my final year of first school. And then that year after, I moved into a bigger school. It's called middle school. So it was from the age of 5 to 8 in where I live. It's not primary or secondary. So then all of a sudden I go from being the oldest in the school year to the youngest in the whole of the school. And I think that had quite a dramatic impact as well on how I felt about it in those early years. And it drove a desire to hide it and a desire to try and fit in above all else, because that was quite early on. And, you start asking questions about why me, and then you move schools and then you're the youngest in the school and you're trying to fit in. And I think it just drove that desire of, I'm going to try and keep this away from people.
But you haven't quite told me what the emotion was. You've sort of you've skirted around. You told me that there was something about it was bothering you, and why me, and trying to fit in. But what were the actual emotions that you were experiencing and the thoughts?
I think we are delving back quite a few years, but I think it's anger. I think it's frustration, sadness, I think, as well. Really quite upset, underlying. And I do find it quite hard to talk about those years, because they are the years that really hurt me still. I think they still hurt me now, because I never got that. And we spoke about it, so I never had that chance to talk about it. I never had that chance as I was to share it. I've never had that psychological support around the condition. So I still think there's a lot of emotion attached to it, a lot of sadness, anger, which fuels the why me. That outburst sort of a year in, 2 years in, and that continued, for a little bit into the teenage years.
There are more than 30 participants in the meeting. This meeting is being recorded.
Okay, that's a nice little automated blip. Are you back with us, Chris? I can see you're on mute.
Yeah, bear with me.
Yeah.
Am I back?
Yeah, you're back.
Yeah, back.
Great,
Yes.
thank you. So you said about the anger, which fuels the why me. And what was the sadness that you were feeling? What was that about?
I think because of how the dramatic changes that happen to your lifestyle, and seeing my friends around me living carefree lifestyles, I think, and knowing how much it started to affect me, because obviously you have those couple of years where it's like honeymoon period as well, where things don't, it's not dramatic, and then it starts to get a bit more like I've got to take loads of insulin. You might have more hypos because things aren't, your body's not doing any regulation of it, and things like, and they were getting worse. I think I had would have been on mixture insulin as well at the time, so I would have been on 2 injections a day. That made things really variable, and that, I think that led to frustration, because as well as I loved playing football, but there was parts of me which were being held back at that time of my life, where the way we managed it was not conducive of me playing well every week. And and people could see that I was, you know, I was a half decent player. I was going to be hopefully quite good, and it was something was holding me back, and I knew what it was. My parents knew what it was, but I wasn't prepared to talk about that or share that. So my friends never knew. I just accepted that the bad games were the bad games, even though we all knew deep down, like my mum and dad and me knew, that it was the diabetes that scuppered me on that day. And that fuels frustration, anger, sadness, as that, you know, the thing you love doing, the thing you want to do as a kid, not being able to do it to the best of your ability, and through no fault of your own, and through no other experience that anybody else was sharing with me as a child could resonate with me. So I was there on my own feeling that way, or that's how it.
Yeah, you said something, you know, about your sadness, and you've described it really eloquently, and thank you for that. And I think what you're trying to say is that you experience, the sadness relates to you experiencing a lot of losses, not just of a part of your body that isn't working anymore, but a losses of who you were. You know, a carefree footballer that probably thought he was going to be the next Ronaldo, you know, like you all do. And you know, there's a lovely dreams, and they're the right dreams, and these were stolen from you, and it must have become easy for you to blame the diabetes on everything. And you can start seeing how the diabetes starts taking on a bad image in the brain, as if it's got some power over you, doesn't it? It's almost as if it's a person.
Yeah, and it forces you to do things that you don't want to do, and that you can't see other people doing. You know, you keep the people around you. You know, you're forced. I lived really rigid lifestyle, so you know, people. I had to come in and do my injection at a particular time of the day, and nothing could move away from that. The 2 injections a day meant it was a rigid lifestyle. I had to eat at particular times. So that, like you say, the carefree thing was stripped away from me completely. You grow up very, very quickly. You start having worries and anxiety at an age that you shouldn't have, in my opinion. You shouldn't be accustomed to those worries and anxieties. And that's thrust upon you at the age of 8, 9, 10, for me. And yeah, I think there's plenty of things I attribute it to me mentally helping me, but that's one thing that I've really struggled with probably my entire life, is the anxiety side and the extra worry that type 1 diabetes brings. But it's given me other strengths as well, I think.
So we'll come back to that, because that's really important what you're saying. So how you also said that there was nobody like you. And I imagine in a small town like Redditch, and the school that you described, usually I always think that in every school there is one person with diabetes every year, approximately in each year. Yeah. And so I imagine in your schools that there weren't that many people with diabetes. So can you tell us a little bit more about what it was like to be so isolated, and to be, you know, a word that one can use is like to be the other?
Yeah, I would say it's an odd feeling. It's something that yeah, I don't, I haven't really thought about it too much, but I always just felt different. And I liken it to almost like chasing my tail. Like I could never quite get there to fitting in. So I'm always chasing this idea that I want to fit in, because that's what I was like as a kid. And that's what most kids want to do at that sort of, I would say, 9 to 15, 16. And you're trying to find yourself, but you're trying to fit in with everything else. And I was like chasing my tail because I could never fit in. I was never able to fit in fully with what was going on around me. And I think there was not that much acceptance of difference in the late 90s, early 2000s. It was still the legacy of, the challenges that have come through society in the 80s and things like that. That haven't changed that much. I look at the way that people are looked after in schools now, for example, that are living with type 1. And it's unrecognizable to the experience that I had growing up with the condition. And I think because of that, you get into this place where you feel isolated. And there were people in my schools with it, but the key thing is there wasn't many of those people with it that I had other things in common with. So you don't strike up that conversation to talk to them unless I found a type 1 playing football. And what else was I going to talk to them about? I mean, you can have another type 1, could be a female type 1 that's into, shopping, fashion, all that sort of stuff that's in my school year or the year below. But there's not much commonality other than the fact that I live with a condition. And at that time, I'm so busy trying to hide it that I'm not that bothered about going up to somebody to talk about the condition. When actually, if they had football in there, then I would probably try and find the commonality in the football, and then maybe I would have felt like I could talk a little bit about it. And I did, and eventually I did kind of have a friend like that who's involved with the work that I do now, and he lives pretty close to me, and we've grown up. He was 2 years younger than me, so but that was a little bit after that. We sort of we became good friends, probably I would say about when I was about 17. And he was about 15. So but for a long while, there was just too much difference with the people that I did know that had the condition.
And what was your experience at school like? How, you mentioned the school. Can you give me some examples of your experience of teaching of your peers? Were you bullied? Were you just ignored? Were you made specialed out?
I think there was a mixture of all of it. I have been called names for living with diabetes. They like to use the word diabetic followed by some kind of word to try and get under your skin. I had that a few times, and that makes you dislike it, doesn't it?
Would you be willing to tell us what those words were? Diabetic.
Do you want? I can swear on the camera if you like, but yeah, I was called diabetic twat, diabetic prick, things like that to just get under your skin. That will anger anybody. Being called those words will anger anyone, but when they attach the word that you don't feel comfortable about to that, makes it even worse. And they always stick with me. Some of the stuff that was said, it wasn't lots, but there was isolated incidents where it happened. Other things that I suppose happened were not really referencing it, forgetting about it. And for the most part, I was ignored about it, left to my own devices. At that time, teachers, if he's all right, just sort of crack on, and they all let us know. And that was, that may be partly my fault by the fact that I was hiding it and I didn't really want too much of a deal being made of it. But also there was not really much of an attempt to educate children around me about what it is Chris might be going through. And, as a result of that, you just, because you feel ignored by it, you just try and ignore it yourself, I suppose. I never had any special dispensation for exams. I don't think there were any. There might have been guidelines available, but I didn't feel that it was talked about or shared enough when I was doing my GCSEs. I think it was more apparent when I was doing maybe a little bit later when I got onto uni and A-levels a few years later, which would have been the late 2000s, so 2009, 10, around that sort of time. But it's, there's been variety.
I mean, you are actually you are being a bit hard on yourself, Chris. You said, oh, maybe I should have come out a bit more, but you were still a child. And it's not really your job as a child to go around saying, excuse me, I'm really struggling. It is for family and your teachers to sort of keep that eye out for you. So it's an interesting point you make. I'll be interested to see what our listeners say about their experience if they had diabetes as young people, whether they had similar experiences, and who do they think is the responsibility lies in trying to get you to describe your thoughts and feelings at that tender age. Can you just tell me a little bit more then about, as you were growing up, how has diabetes informed your personality or your psychology? You mentioned you're a lot stronger now, but what has that journey been? Have you had any major hiccups on the way, major turning points?
Yeah, there's been a couple. I'd say, I think because as I said, some of the name calling, some of the challenges, I think it built a lot of thick skin and resilience to things, to challenges. So it's helped me in that way when I've been looking at sport, when I've been doing other things, because you just become not immune to negativity, but you see it in a different way, where you go, okay, it's a challenge that I'm just going to go and overcome now, because I've had all of the things that other things have been thrown at me. You just go, right, well, this will be just another one of those things where I'm going to go and tackle it. I think that's been a big part and parcel of it. I think I wish I was a bit more of a risk taker. I feel like I've been coached into being super organised and a little bit risk averse as a result of living with type 1. I do take risks, but I could take more risks. And in my life, I feel like maybe I've played some things a little safe, because I think it just coached me psychologically to be that way. And that's, they're probably some of the key things that I would say. I've had some significant things where I had a very bad hypo when I was about 14. Where I went into a fit and almost, the point where you're starting to go towards a coma. So you start to think about life a little bit differently at that point. That's pretty risky, pretty scary.
What was your control like in your teens?
Not as good as it is now. HbA1cs were always constantly bobbing around. It's probably between sort of 65 to 80, I think, was probably the very a broad scale of where I was for, I don't know, maybe 13, 14 years or so.
And what was the turning point in getting you to change, to look after your health?
Couple of things, really. I think one was me achieving my mountaintop, if you like, the push in my own sport. It felt that I could maybe talk about what it's been like to try and achieve and get to my mountaintop, and how it felt, the experience of what it feels like, or what it felt like to me living with type 1 and then trying to push for achievement in sport, etc. How that was. So that helped me then start thinking, right, if I might not be the only one that's had this kind of thing. So I thought, I'm going to try and share this. That was a key thing. But also there was a slight eye complication, which was just flagged up for the very first time, which scares anybody into some action. And then because of the feet starting to feel a bit more like maybe I should share, maybe I should talk about type 1, then talking to other people through the online, like the GB doc, was one of the first places that I reached out and just talking about what it was like, and generating friendships and commonalities with other people who share my interests, that live with my condition. And I wish I could have done that 10 years earlier.
You're saying there are two things really that were a turning point for you. One is very early signs of getting a diabetes complication, like, for instance, it's really real that I might lose my vision. It's not just that the doctors and nurses keep saying it. It is true that this could really happen. And secondly, you actually going out of your way to get the support you need, looking for somebody who would understand you, and you reaching out. So it sounds like that combination was really important for you. Have you ever had any psychological help in your lifetime?
I have, but never as part of my type 1 diabetes management. So never as a part of my clinic have I ever specifically spoken about the psychology of me living with type 1. Now, I've needed the support when I probably went through one of my biggest challenges, which was almost like a breakdown, almost anxiety breakdown, which was probably about 6-7 years ago. And that's when I needed psychological support. And that was a lot of me seeking it out, to be honest, and not really knowing that maybe my diabetes had quite a big impact on that specifically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you've been very, Chris, you've been very open and frank, and it's really hard, isn't it, to talk about one's inner self so openly and honestly to a community of people that perhaps some of them have never met you before. So I want to thank you. I'm aware of time, and that I'm going to, we'll come back to you when we get some of the questions and answers and bring back some of the comments you've made about how to make changes. So I'd like to now welcome Dr. Pratik Choudhary. Thank you so much for joining us, Pratik. Perhaps we can start by asking you a little bit about yourself as well. Like, where did you study medicine? How long have you been a doctor? And what made you decide to go into diabetes?
So I studied medicine in India, and I came to the UK 22 years ago. And I've been working in diabetes for 20 of those years. I've been at King's for 15 of those years. And I don't know, like a lot of people, I fell into diabetes by serendipity, really. It wasn't an active choice. There's a job going, I started doing it, liked it, the next job came up, and the next job, and then here I am. Yeah.
What was it about diabetes, though, that you liked?
I think I like diabetes. I like the relationships you form with people. And I like the fact that, I'm seeing people on an ongoing basis. So, and a lot of people come into medicine, they want to fix someone and then be done and then fix the next one. But I kind of like the kind of, you get to know people, get to know the person a little bit behind what they present to you in clinic. Sometimes you develop that relationship with people. So, and then the numbers behind it as well. I guess I like numbers as well.
Okay, so that combination of having a long relationship with a person with diabetes and the mathematics of it really appeals to you, yeah? So what is your special interest in diabetes?
So I've about 15 years almost doing exclusively type 1 diabetes. And I came there actually through I did a research project on hypoglycemia. And so it's through my kind of academic interest in hypoglycemia that I've ended up with an interest in technology and interest in transplantation. And actually, as it happens now, an interest in the psychology behind it, because all the things come together. So, but I guess type 1 diabetes and hypoglycemia probably take up 90% of what I do.
So tell us a little bit about the latest in digital diabetes. What is it that's the most exciting, interesting sort of piece of research that's going on that you know of or involved in?
So I guess and the real cutting edge stuff that a lot of people are familiar with, excited about, and people like me are keen to see how we can show the benefit and get it into the hands of people are closed loop devices. And that means that, you've got for those of you who are not familiar with this, you've got a sensor that's measuring your glucose all the time, and it gives the information to a computer program, and that computer program then would tell an insulin pump how much insulin to give. And it takes away a lot of the work of diabetes, holds sugar levels steady. And in all the studies at the moment, it does allow most people to achieve, who stick with it, achieve to some extent, kind of much better numbers than they can get overall. And that's probably the most exciting stuff broadly that we're trying to get into clinical practice. And then the other exciting thing I'm working on, and I'm leading a large European project, is, as a lot of people, and a lot of people on this call might be using the Libre sensors, which are the little patch you use on your arm. And as people have been using that, of course, now you're getting data continuously, and not just maybe 3, 4, or 5 times when you're pricking your finger. And we're finding a lot more hypoglycemia than we used to, because now they're measuring things when you're asleep. And what's really interesting is we really don't know what that hypoglycemia means. Because when I wear that sensor, and if I have half a bottle of wine in the evening, my sensor shows low through the whole night as well. So it's not something as dangerous as maybe in the past we thought it was. And so one of the big pushes of a major project that we're doing over the next couple of years is going to be trying to understand what those silent asymptomatic hypos mean. We know when someone has a hypo overnight, and you feel rough the next morning. We know what that means, but that was a hypo that woke the person up.
Mm.
But with these sensors, people are finding lots of hypos that they don't feel, that are silent, and we don't really know if what their impact is. Do they have any impact or not? Or they just kind of, so that's something that I think is interesting.
And I think that's what I agree with you, Pratik. You know, that's what's really amazing and interesting. I know that for people who've got diabetes, it's a condition that they have to live with and suffer, and it comes with a lot of psychological aspects. But from also a medicine point of view, there is so much more for us to do, isn't there? That's what you're saying. Just when you think you've got it sorted, e.g. with a Libre, there's a whole new day. And all of this is about improving the care of patients. So I'd just like to sort of, you know, being a psychiatrist, I've always been curious about the closed loop system. Do you think, therefore, if we did get the closed loop system working, do you think, therefore, we don't need to worry about the mind in diabetes? Do you think the person with diabetes can get on with their lives? They don't need to hate it anymore. They don't need to have the sadness and the anger that Chris describes, and many of the people with diabetes describe. They can just get on with lives with a technological attachment.
No, I think the more you work with tech, and the longer you spend with diabetes, you realize that relationship between the condition and the person is something really deep. And I want to come back and thank you, Chris. You know, as you were speaking, what you realize is I've heard you speak on the national level on a number of times, but actually you're so candid here. And every time you speak to someone and you hear someone, you realize another layer of what's going on behind it and what's going on behind it. And, you know, someone could see you speak at a national meeting, you're someone who sounds very confident, and, you know, you've had it easy with type 1 diabetes might be what someone says. And actually, you know, you showed how tough it is. And technology, as it stands at the moment, never takes the condition away. You know, I don't have diabetes. I don't have to live with a pump dangling here and a sensor dangling there and an itchy patch there because of the sensor and the fact that the machine missed that or missed that. These are they're just tools to make things a little bit easier, to help you get on. And they can help. And for people who they work, that, you know, it's incremental benefits. You know, when we taught people how to adjust the insulin with food, with Daphne, we got response back saying, wow, this has changed my life. Now I can suddenly do things that I never could do before. And then when those people get on and get maybe a pump or a sensor, this is life-changing. Now I see so much data, I can manage it better. And these are all incremental steps that chip away at that, whatever that burden, pressure, weight, that minus sign in your life that diabetes brings with it. It just chips away and puts in the background a little bit maybe, but it will still be there. And we as clinicians have to learn how to manage that relationship with the...
And I think you did it very nicely, Pratik, when you said, you know, there's a bit of dangling wire here and a bit of tube there and a bit of digital technology there. I think what a lot of people with diabetes would appreciate hearing you say this is that you acknowledge that this is a burden for people with diabetes. That as a diabetes professional, you know that this is hard work, and that you are in that journey with the person, trying to, like you say, chip away, try to make it a bit easier. So thank you for that. I'd like to just also ask you, how has your work changed since COVID-19? Because a lot of people with diabetes have been concerned that they've been abandoned and forgotten. What has been your own experience at King's?
So I think at King's, a bit like most hospitals around the country, actually, a lot of our team got pushed into preparations for the worst case scenario of what might happen. Now we're really grateful that actually whatever has happened, despite, you know, all the high numbers, certainly in the hospital, it hasn't been as bad. But still, the vast majority of our consultants are not doing any of their diabetes clinics. Everything was cancelled across the board, and there was a couple of us. So I guess partly because I've not done general medicine for a number of years, I've only done diabetes. I picked up, you know, what we did was we looked at all the appointments, and we have probably about 500 to 600 appointments a month at King's. And so we just scanned through them, and we picked, you know, we said we've got a limited capacity. We're going to try and make contact with the people who are struggling the most and offer support as and when they need it. And so, I think we, you know, so everything was cancelled, and we've been holding clinics and appointments and dealing with responses that they have. And I think what we're hearing most of all are three really common themes. I think there were people who were struggling with their diabetes before, who we're trying to support through it and make sure they don't drop off. And then there's a lot of worry about what are the risks of diabetes, lots of confusion about the clear messages about You know, do you stay inside? Do you go outside? Are you in the shielding group? And so the government message hasn't been very clear on that, to be honest. And then there's also a handful of things that we're picking up where people who would normally have come to hospital for problems haven't. And you know, things like people maybe with diabetes foot ulcers, people who need their eyes sorting out, and people are staying away because they're scared.
Yeah.
And actually, there is capacity to see people who don't have COVID at the moment. The hospitals actually are quite quiet, from what I can see.
Okay. So
we're ramping up our ability to kind of get back towards normal a bit.
Yeah, and so have you got any practical tips or advice to people with diabetes during the COVID? I know that people think that COVID pandemic is sort of slightly settling down, or whether we're getting used to it or institutionalized, but we know there may be waves. We know it's not really gone away. Are there any sort of advice to people with diabetes that you want to make sure they're here?
Yeah, so I think you know, across all the platforms that we're speaking, I think the first thing is that there is what we have seen, and thankfully not so much with type 1, but we have seen a lot of type 2 diabetes, and even people without diabetes coming in with diabetic ketoacidosis with high ketones.
Right.
And we don't really understand what's going on. And interesting, there was a Inside Health Radio 4 program a couple of days ago,
Yes.
Where the reporter's partner had a DK, and you know, we haven't heard much DKs here at King's, but we have had a few around. So I think in this scenario where if you there is a risk of becoming unwell, and if you are, it seems that COVID does cause ketones at lower glucose levels, making sure that, you know, making sure you have ketone strips, and if you're unwell, you check for ketones, and if you do have ketones, you call the hospital and you know what to do. I think that's a really important message that I think almost all of us who've spoken at various meetings put out as our number one thing. I think the number two thing is, although supply chains are okay on the whole, when you get down to about a month of supplies, whether that's for pumps and get some supplies for pumps. So, you know, it is important to be a little bit organized around your supplies, and particularly for people using pumps, to make sure they have backup insulin pens, because if there is a problem with supplies, to make sure you've got stuff online. And then thirdly, I think it's, you know, most hospitals, I think, should have sent out a communication about what to do if you've got a problem, and most hospitals do have someone manning a support, a phone number, and you know, whether you pull that out, so you know that's hidden somewhere in an old letter from the hospital, there is some contact details. Make sure you put it on your fridge or somewhere, so if you do become unwell, you know who to call, and you know what your medication list is. And it is, the other thing I've seen is, you know, I've seen a couple of papers just come through really, which have mapped, you know, glucose readings through COVID, and actually it seems that people's control is a little bit better in COVID because people are locked down.
Yeah.
And maybe life is a little bit more steady.
Yeah.
And there's less, you know, mucking, as it were. And it is an opportunity. I've seen some people saying, well, use that time to readjust your settings and just check some things out. And, you know, if you're not tied up, if work is maybe a little bit lighter, or you're not commuting so much, you can spend that time maybe just fine tuning things and seeing how
interesting. So thank you, Pratik. We'll be interested to see what the people who are listening, whether they identify with that last point, you know, that COVID-19 has helped them to sort of, you know, re-look at their relationship with diabetes. So actually on that point, we'll hand over to our listeners, and thank you so much for listening, and I hope you have these in the chats. I'm going to hand you over to Emma, who is going to be reading out some of the questions. Emma, you're still on mute, but you're not anymore.
Hi. We had some excellent feedback and questions from our audience. There is a teacher who said that at the end of the term, where they had some time, she let all the students present something that they wanted on whatever topic they want to talk about. And there was one student with type 1 diabetes who showed how she checks for her blood sugar and how she injects, and it really helped the whole class understand more about the experience of having type 1 diabetes, which is excellent. And then everyone became more understanding to allowing her to eat a biscuit in class when needed. About questions, we have many interesting ones as well. So there was one for Chris. It is about how do you manage your blood sugar while playing football?
Wow, there's quite a lot in that. I'll try and keep it pretty short and succinct. I think for me it's about preparation. So I like to try and keep things consistent across the day before and then the day of a game. I like to try and space out boluses in terms of meals. So there's a good 3-hour gap between the last meal and then going into a game. And then when I get to a game, I'm very much trying to aim for a particular level. So I like to try and get myself to about 8 or 9 for football, knowing that I'm going to drop probably in the first half, maybe a tiny top up at half time. Lots of testing, as much as I can. Lucky now that I've got CGM, but before it would have been lots of finger prick testing or as much as I could manage. And then having everything you need just in case it goes wrong or you need to react. So small adjustments. So if I was going slightly high and I wanted to try and get into a level that meant I could get the best performance, then I would make small adjustments like 1 unit here at half time if I needed it, or before the game. And then I'd also do the same with glucose. So I have the kind of the lift glucose shots, 15 grams, bang. And you kind of, I got a picture in my mind of how much 1 unit moves my glucose levels by and how much 15 grams of fast acting moves my levels by. So I can make those small adjustments on game day. But for me, it's a lot about routine, as much preparation as I can, because I want to be able to enjoy it and I want to be able to switch off from diabetes. So if I don't do any preparation and I just rock up and it all goes to pot, to be honest, and you can't enjoy it and you can't play well. So I try and put in as much as I can. Obviously, that's quite a bit of an extra burden that most others don't have to deal with. But to do the things you want to do, sometimes you do have to put in that extra bit of legwork.
I think your point about, I think the point you said a lot about the actual preparation and less on what you really wanted to do, which I really want to have a good game of football. And I think that's the bit that we have to keep in mind, isn't it? I read a fantastic article about air pilots who had type 1 diabetes in balance. I don't know if anybody else who's listening read it. It was exactly the same picture as you, the same pattern as your story, which is I want to fly planes. I want to fly the jumbo jets. Therefore, and I really want to enjoy it, therefore I'm going to do A, B, and C preparation beforehand. I'm going to tell my co-pilot what to send me reminders. And they're really happy because they're doing the very thing that they want to do. And I think that is the key point, the key message is not, obviously you have to prepare, but the key message is what do I want to do with my life that I really want to enjoy? And what do I have to do with my diabetes in order to enjoy those things that I want to do? So thank you for that, Chris.
Can I make a point there that I think a really important job that we clinicians and healthcare professionals it is to say, a lot of times people move their life around their diabetes and around the doses, and actually the mindset we have, and I hope other clinicians increasingly are starting to have, is right, my job is you tell me what you need to do. You want to fly a plane, you want to play football, and my job is to go out there and find a way to make that happen for you.
No, definitely. And I wish there was more consultants like you, Pratik. That's the way that I would have loved to have had, that kind of all of experience of having that relationship where, and to be fair, I've had it at times throughout my life whilst living with it, with particular consultants, with particular nurses where they're brilliant and they would just go, right, this is what you want to do. We're going to do our best to try and help make that happen. But it's not always consistent. And I think that's a really good message for healthcare professionals, is that is such a massive thing. If you can really look at what matters to us and then help us as best you can to tailor our management of the condition to allow us to do that, that's huge.
Thank you, Chris. Emma?
There is another question about both personal and, I guess, professional tips on how can you encourage someone who avoids exercise because of fear of hypos?
Good question. Really good question. Shall I Shall we ask Pratik first?
Yeah,
You said that, you know, you want people to say they want exercise, but they're scared of hypos.
I think, yeah, and often, you know, so someone came to me and that was what their situation was. And we know for a fact that actually people with type 1 diabetes as a whole, when you survey a whole bunch of people, exercise less than people without diabetes. And this is a major factor in that. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, part of that is understanding how to do it safely and the little tips and tricks that, you know, a lot of people have picked those up through experience. And if your initial experience was bad, then people, you know, we think about this, you know, you can plan of how you're going to manage the situation, adjust your insulin food to stop the hypo, or that's quite difficult. You just stop doing the activity that causes the problem. And it's about giving people the confidence and the tools to say, right, okay, the reason why you're hypoing is this. And so if we make these adjustments, we can minimize it, and then giving them the confidence to try that out in bigger doses, as it were, to give them the confidence to go ahead and exercise. Because, you know, it doesn't matter how, you know, I think that I can see the comment there about being insulin sensitive and exertion affecting blood glucose. But it's all in proportion in that sense. And it's all about making then, if that person needs bigger change, and personalizing that plan. And actually, just to mention, I run an organization called the Diabetes Technology Network. And actually, if you search DTN and education, there's some tips from kind of two or three of the guys who've done a lot of the research in that field, with some really useful practical tips about how to exercise with type 1 diabetes, and just some common ideas that, you know, might help, you know, as a general rule.
I think the important point you make, Pratik, therefore, is actually somebody who might have fear of hypo during exercise, equip them with the knowledge, as much facts and advice and knowledge, and optimize their technology and their care. So that's the sort of the medical educational aspect. Now let's talk to Chris about the psychological aspect of overcoming the actual fear. You can give people as much technology, as much facts and figures, but you're the human being that's actually having the panic attack. So you've obviously been in that situation yourself. You described a really bad hypo. How did you do it?
I've got one of my favourite things this is to talk about, because this happens to be, people will see it often as their own fault, a mistake. And I try and view the challenge of it as seeing it as like a bad pass, you know, in sport. Like, it's just a small mistake that you make, but you're not going to stop playing the sport because of one bad pass. It just doesn't happen. You're going to go back, you're going to try again, you're going to do it. And I think it's getting that mindset around trying it, because exercise has got to be, and is a huge part of living a healthy lifestyle. It makes a huge difference to lots of people. It's fun, it's enjoyable. Now, if you do make a mistake, you do have hypos and you fear them, we all have them. I've had them. And sometimes, you know, you experience them and you attribute like a real heavy weight of that experience to something really, really negative, and being able to try and change it into something softer and using softer language and building confidence. I think it's one of those areas which is really psychologically demanding. And I think this is the part where, you know, as we just said, you know, this giving everybody the skills and the knowledge and the technology, you actually need the confidence to be able to go out there and do that. And whether that's from talking to other people that share your interests, or share your, you know, your where you want to go with exercise, what you're doing, your sport, or whether it's, you know, trying it safely with somebody who's just, you know, can give you some advice to try and do it as well, from experts or from somebody that does a sport with type 1. You know, that kind of, it's building, it's a confidence thing. It is massively. I never feared them, because I had one, and I was like, it's just almost, I saw it very early as like, this is going to happen to me. And it was, and I kind of used it as like, it's going to be mistakes, and it's going to be like any other mistake I make. And that bad pass analogy is how I've seen it for years and years. I don't fear them, because I've had many, and as somebody with type 1, you will have them over the years, and you might have many, you might have few, but to see them as something as less significant than what, you know, we're obviously taught, and maybe the language that you're using to begin with to talk about hypoglycemias makes them sound really, really desperately like it's the end of the world. And maybe that's a healthcare professional thing where they're really bad to have these experiences with hypos. But actually, you know, most of the time they're pretty mild. You know, you catch them, you have a few symptoms, you feel a bit rough, you have some glucose, you come back out, and more often than not, I feel okay.
So Chris, that's really, you know, I think what you're saying is really powerful, which is you had then the fears of hypo and you've got over it. I think there's quite a lot of people out with diabetes at the moment who haven't got to that stage. And what you're saying is something very hopeful. You know, the combination of Pratik, get your knowledge, you're coming to accept it as part and parcel of having diabetes is a journey. And I would like to add, I mean, I think your point about this is a huge psychological component. I'd like to sort of tease out the points you made, which is get support, do it with somebody. I think you were trying to say is do it slowly and steadily. So I wouldn't go running for a marathon if you really bad fear of glycemia. But start off with something gentle and experiment, building all the knowledge you've got. So I think what you're saying is, you know, that it is possible to overcome it. Thank you. Emma, are there any other questions that we've got? Time for one more question, unfortunately.
We have one for Pratik mostly. We were discussing a lot in the chat about the pros and cons for tech. So what about the psychological implications of discovering you're having nighttime hypos?
Yeah, so with the tech, I think, and actually I'll add to that, similarly, a lot of people are seeing highs that they never used to see between meals that can make them feel, you know, for a lot of times, healthcare professionals like myself will have talked about target glucose levels of 5 to 8. Now, those are all built around pre-meal glucoses, and we haven't really said that actually post-meal, we expect sugars to go up and down, and then suddenly someone gets a new piece of tech and they see both post-meal highs, which might have a psychological implication, and they see a lot of these silent lows, which are also having a challenge. And so I think one of the things that we'd like to get out there is you know, this myth of things are going to be absolutely flat line. You know, when I wear a CGM, my glucose goes up after a meal and down when you know, afterwards. It's low through the night. So if my human pancreas can't keep a flat line, trying to do that with guesstimating shots and pens is not really feasible. And actually, it's not really necessary either, because if you look at people, we now have data, people who've had 40 years of diabetes with no complications. On average, they've achieved about 60 or 65% of the time between 4 and 10. And they've had, that means, up to a third of their time above 10 and maybe up to 5 or 10% below 4. And they've been okay, no microvascular complications, long-term diabetes control. And so I think that message, as we're getting more tech about what those numbers means and what your allowance, as it were. And I think Chris's analogy of the kind of, to use a footballing thing, is if you're a professional footballer, you don't get every pass right. And you're bound to have some wrongs. You know, in a lot of my presentations, I have a golfing analogy, which is similar, that, you know, even Tiger Woods in his pomp, if you want to get a sugar of 5 every time, that means you're hitting a hole in one every single time. It means every single shot you make is hitting the goal and beating the goalkeeper. And so we've got to know to live a healthy full life, you want to get about 60-65% of your time in range, which means that you might have 4 or 5% low, and you might have up to 30%. And 30% of the day, 24 hours, 30% is about 8 hours a day. And so if it does go high because you've just had pizza, because you're out with your friends, or it's your birthday, and it's a bit high for a couple of hours, it's going to take some time to come down. It's not a problem, as long as in the big picture, you have more days when it's in range than not.
So I think what you're saying, Pratik, is that, yes, there are going to be some psychological side effects of technology, and the work that the diabetes professionals are going to have to do is help find new ways of reassuring patients with this new data. And that's the research that you're doing as well, but to what extent are some of these slight deviations between 4 and 7 really going to be that much of a difference? So that's a huge amount. It's a really good question, and it's a really good thing for patients, people with diabetes, and health professionals to start talking to each other about what is important, isn't, from a science and a psychology point of view. So I know that we've had a lot more questions, but we've had such really good discussions and conversations with Chris and Pratik. We haven't got any more time for questions. I'd like to just hand over to Rebecca to give us to share with you this week's toolkit.
Great, thank you, Khalida, and thanks to Pratik and Chris. I'm just going to share with you a slide of resources for this week. So Pratik and Chris have already mentioned a few of these, so thank you for that. I'll put this on the chat in a minute, and I'll also share these on our social media so you can view them later. So the first one, Chris mentioned the diabetes football community. So there's the link there if you want to find out how to get involved on and off the pitch. And then some exercise and diabetes resources. There's two great ones here, particularly the One Bloody Drop run by Paul Coker. So it takes you through different types of exercise and how to manage insulin levels. And there's some really great stories and resources on there. And some diabetes technology resources. Pratik mentioned earlier the DTN webinars. So here's a link here, and it takes you through flash glucose monitoring and continuous glucose monitoring. And lastly, I put on here Edinburgh Centre for Endocrinology and Diabetes. There's two good resources here. One of them is actually a quiz, and it's about flash glucose monitoring, the Freestyle Libra. So it takes you through different scenarios and how you'd respond to different scenarios. That's quite useful. So let us know if you've tried any of these and what you think.
Okay, so that's the end of our hour. Thank you so much again to Chris, Pratik, Rebecca and Emma, and all of you who've been listening. We've got another topic next week. We'll be putting on our Twitter, Instagram and emails. So please stay in touch, and look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you very much to all of you. Bye.
Goodbye.
Cheers, everyone. Bye.
Bye, Chris. Bye, Pratik.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.